Dear daughter, today I write with a heavy heart because I realized that, on several occasions, I lost myself trying to love someone, and if I'm not here one day to tell you this, I hope my words still make sense to you. Once, I was sitting in the living room, surrounded by laughter that felt distant. He was talking about work, achievements, and I smiled, but it was an empty smile. The truth is, I couldn't remember the last time I laughed at something genuine. I looked around, and the walls seemed to close in on me. It wasn't just his words that felt strange. It was the way I was slowly becoming a shadow of the person I used to be. My body was there, but my voice was disappearing. I started to speak more softly, as if the tone of my voice could adjust the atmosphere. What should have felt normal now sounded like a timid echo, and every yes I said when I wanted to say no was a silent loss. A part of me was saying goodbye, a little piece at a time, and it was in that moment I realized it wasn't love, it was a test that required me to shrink myself to fit into the idea he had of who I should be. If you feel the need to shrink yourself, take notice. This is not love. Check in with yourself. Ask yourself, am I growing or shrinking? If the answer is shrinking, know that true love never demands that you become smaller. If you find yourself constantly adjusting your being to fit someone else, remember, you don't need to apologize for taking up space. You shouldn't have to ask for permission to exist fully. If you remember just one thing, remember this: your voice matters. One night, he turned to me and asked, "Why are you so quiet?" I remembered every moment I had chosen silence. Every unspoken word weighed heavy in the air, an invisible burden growing between us. I looked at him, trying to find an answer that wouldn't hurt him, but the truth was that I was tired of carrying all this weight. "I don't know," was all I could manage to say. Honesty dissolved into a cloud of insecurities. And so, the conversation shifted direction, like a boat veering away from an invisible iceberg. He continued talking about his plans, and I remained there, lost among the lines of his speech. That question lingered in my mind like an open wound. I wanted to scream that I was suffocating, that every glance from him generated a silent imperative, "Be who I want you to be." But instead I just nodded, like an obedient puppet. Weeks went by, and I started to notice how he looked at me. It was no longer with admiration, but with a subtle expectation, a judgment that slowly shaped my behavior. Love turned into a negotiation. I felt like a puzzle whose pieces were constantly being rearranged, trying to find the perfect layout that would satisfy him. Sometimes, upon waking up, I would wonder who I was. My reflection in the mirror showed a stranger, tired eyes and a vacant smile, and deep down, a growing anger. Anger at myself for letting this happen. A muffled rage that screamed, "You're not like this. Where is the girl who dreamed big?" She was there, hidden beneath layers of conformity. The day I received a message from a friend asking if I wanted to go out was like a ray of light. She always brought out the best in me. I looked at my phone, hesitating. How could I go out? What would he think? And there it was, the choice again. The same test, disguised as affection, but deeply rooted in possessiveness. Finally, I took a deep breath and replied, "Yes, let's go out." Freedom was within reach, but guilt followed me like a shadow. When I arrived at the meeting, her laughter was like music, but the lightness was soon overshadowed by a lingering thought. He must be worried. But for a moment, I ignored it. I dove into the conversations, laughed more than I had in months. There, I existed. However, when I returned home, the silence of that familiar space hit me hard. The phone buzzed. It was him. The tone of the message carried an unmistakable weight. "So you chose to have fun without me?" And anger surged in a way I had never felt before. I had allowed myself to breathe, but now I felt the pressure building again. With each word I typed in response, I realized I was beginning to fight back. "I have the right to live, even when you're not by my side." But his reply was swift, a low blow. "Stop being dramatic." It felt like a slap to the face. That phrase echoed in my head, revealing the raw truth. I wasn't in a relationship. I was in an emotional prison. At that moment, something inside me broke. The voice I had lost began to return, timid yet strong. I needed to do things differently. I remembered the questions I had asked myself so many times. Am I growing or shrinking? I took a deep breath. I am growing, even if it's the hardest way possible. The decision was made. The next day, I met him. His gaze greeted me like a tiger ready to pounce, but I wasn't going to retreat anymore. I wouldn't allow my being to be compressed any longer. "We need to talk," I said. Surprise and confusion danced across her face. "I am not a shadow. I deserve to be heard and respected." The words flowed like a river after long months of drought. He tried to interrupt, but I kept going. Each syllable was a step toward freedom. When I finished, something changed. The atmosphere felt lighter, but the tension remained. I had begun to set boundaries, and I saw his expression shift to something I had never seen before: insecurity. "If you don't like it, there's nothing I can do," he replied, but the lack of conviction in his voice made it clear that he was starting to understand. I had chosen a path that could lead to pain, but also to true freedom. Notice, dear, that love should not be a burden. If someone wants you to shrink, that is not love. You do not need to apologize for being who you are. Your voice matters. And if one day you feel that your essence is being shaped by someone else, have courage. True love does not dim your light. It illuminates it. And if at any moment you feel small, remember this: growing can be painful, but it's worth it. It's an act of love for yourself. After all, you deserve all the space in the world to shine. And in that moment, when his insecurity became visible, a new feeling took over me. It was as if a veil was being lifted, revealing a version of myself that I had buried under layers of doubt and conformity. The power that had once eluded me now pulsed through my veins. I was more than the echo of his expectations. I was the creator of my own destiny. With the words still echoing in the room, I saw in his eyes a mix of confusion and resistance. He tried to maintain a facade of control, but something within him was breaking, and it was this vulnerability that gave me courage. With every word that came out of me, I felt lighter, more alive. "You can't expect me to change who I am," I continued, my voice firm yet softened by vulnerability. "If you can't accept the woman I am, maybe we shouldn't be together." The idea that I could step out of that vicious cycle no longer seemed so terrifying. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, as if trying to find the right answer, but all he could manage to say was, "I just want to understand." In that moment, I realized it wasn't just a desire to comprehend what I was feeling. It was a fear of losing control over the situation, and perhaps over myself. But I was no longer willing to be a pawn in his game. I went out with my friend again that week. This time, there wasn't a cloud of guilt hanging over me. Instead, there was a lightness in our laughter. We felt like we were reclaiming parts of ourselves that had been stifled. She looked at me and said, "You seem different." I smiled, grateful. The mirror she held up reflected a woman who was starting to love herself again. But just as I was surrounded by laughter, my phone vibrated. Another message from him. The tension returned like an echo. "Are you ignoring me on purpose?" He wanted to know why I hadn't responded immediately, as if I was obligated to justify every second of my life. Deep down, I was overwhelmed with mixed feelings, anger and compassion. Compassion for the way he struggled to hold on to something that was already fading, but also anger at the fact that he still didn't see how this was hurting me. I went outside to get some air. In that moment by the sidewalk, I returned to those questions that haunted me. Am I growing or shrinking? I looked up at the sky, searching for answers. The clouds were dissipating, and the rays of sunlight began to shine through. I decided to respond, but not in a way that would make sense to him. I answered honestly, "I need space to discover who I am. I can't live according to your expectations anymore." He fell silent. A heavy silence hung in the air. It seemed the message had finally sunk in. He was starting to understand that I was choosing a different path, a path that didn't rely on his validation. An internal battle was unfolding in his mind, but that was his struggle, not mine. Freedom began to take shape within me, a freedom that wasn't tied to a relationship, but to the discovery of who I was each day, with every choice. I remember feeling the wind on my face, a gentle breeze caressing my skin. It was a sign that something had changed, something deep and essential. When I returned home that night, the environment no longer felt like a prison. The loneliness was still there, but now there was a space between us that I could fill with self-compassion. Looking in the mirror, I no longer saw a stranger. I saw a fearless woman determined not to be silenced again. If you feel the need to take a step back, do so with love. When we allow ourselves to grow, even when it's hard, we find strength within ourselves. True love doesn't require sacrifice of your essence. It embraces who you are, shines a light on your weaknesses, and rejoices in your victories. And, my dear daughter, know that your worth is not defined by anyone else. You should never allow anyone to diminish the greatness that you carry within you. Your voice deserves to be heard. If one day you feel isolated in a relationship, if shadows start to creep into your light, remember that you have the power to choose. Choose to grow. Choose to shine. Life is full of challenges, and sometimes love can become complicated and painful. But don't forget, you deserve to love and be loved without losing yourself along the way. It is in the choices we make that we find our true selves. So, whenever you feel small, remember that growing can be painful, but it is an act of self-love. After all, you are deserving of all the space in the world to shine. And thus, the journey of rediscovery unfolded, like a fabric that slowly unravels, revealing a tapestry of myself that had been forgotten. With each step away from that relationship, the colors began to return, vibrant shades of joy, pain, and freedom. In a moment of clarity, I realized that the marks left behind were not just wounds, they were scars that told stories. One night, while walking through the city, my eyes observed the unfamiliar faces around me. Among smiles and glances, a stranger greeted me. He had a spark in his eyes, something genuine that reminded me I was not invisible. A simple hello was enough to ignite something within me. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air, and for a brief moment, everything felt light. As I sipped my coffee, laughter echoed from the table next to me, a woman sharing a sincere moment with friends. I watched them closely, filled with nostalgia, but also with a new hope. There was something there that reminded me of myself. Lightness. That feeling of belonging didn't need to come from a romantic partner. It could stem from friendships, from the freedom to be. Those small interactions, once innocuous, were now tiny beacons on my journey. I was learning to make space for them, allowing other forms of love to enter, not just romantic love. I began to reconnect with friends who had been sidelined, those who always brought out the best version of me. Each message replied to felt like a step towards my true essence. Over time, I realized that the anger I felt for having lost myself was a kind of fuel. This inner fire burned gently, yet incessantly, reminding me of how I deserved to be treated. During a deep conversation one night with my friends, someone said, "Being alone is not the same as being lonely," and that phrase echoed in my mind. It was in this space of solitude that I began to bloom. My hobbies resurfaced. Painting, which used to be an escape, was now becoming a form of self-expression. The paintbrush in my hand danced across the canvas, releasing repressed emotions, while vibrant colors reflected the internal journey I was undertaking. Each stroke was a statement, an affirmation that I existed, that I was more than a reflection of others' expectations. There was a special day when I decided to visit an art exhibition. That environment pulsed with life, creativity, and essence. The works spoke in whispers, expressing the struggles and triumphs of artists who, like me, wished to leave their mark. As I looked at one particularly striking piece, an installation symbolizing the fight for freedom, a wave of emotion washed over me. I was not alone in my pain. I was not the only one yearning to reclaim my voice. The art was imbued with collective experiences, and there, surrounded by strangers, I felt connected to something larger. That night, I returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. It was as if a layer of fog had lifted, allowing the light to penetrate the darkness. I wrote, not as a form of venting, but as a commitment, a pact with myself. I noted down desires, dreams, and those small fragments of happiness that began to resurface. I wanted to live, not just survive. Upon waking up, I envisioned a future where I could shine without fear, a future where I could express my no without guilt, and where my smile was authentic. Everything was transforming. The journey of self-affirmation was not easy. Some conversations were still heavy. However, each interaction became an opportunity to reaffirm my space in the world. The naked truth is that I was not perfect. There were days when insecurity tried to creep back in. However, in those moments, I remembered the question that began to guide my life. Am I growing or shrinking? And even in the face of challenges, I chose to grow. In the end, dear daughter, true love is the one that allows us to be whole. It embraces our imperfections, and celebrates our triumphs. If you ever feel suffocated by expectations, know that you have the ability to take a deep breath and find your way back to yourself. Love can uplift, but it should never overshadow your essence. And remember, you are worthy of all the space in the world to shine.